Good afternoon, students. And remember, only as you are in the Spirit can the things of the Spirit reveal themselves to you.
Well, of course, spiritual teaching is not far different than the subject of marriage. In every courtship or every marriage that turns out to be successful, there comes a moment in the experience of the couple when the complete realization comes, all that I have is thine. There's a reciprocity of surrender. So there is in spiritual teaching. When it isn't personal, it's impersonal. There comes in every student of truth on the spiritual path a moment when they recognize that particular teaching which is to become bone of their bone, flesh of their flesh, and blood of their blood, to which they give themselves completely, and which they accept unreservedly. And that is the end toward which we are working, that each one may find, not that the infinite way is their way, not that Joel is their teacher, no. But that each one may be set free in their spiritual conviction to find their teaching and their teacher. In other words, even the purpose of our work in this class is not to bind you to the infinite way, but to bring you to such a sense within your own being that you will be set free to say, this is not my way, and then go on and seek your own. Never make any effort to accept this or even to experiment with it, unless it is the activity of an inner conviction. Until that moment comes, hold back a reserve, as much as say, I'm not yet sure whether this is it for me or not. But when the moment of conviction comes, then let go. Because then is when the miracle of God appears. Again, there can be no miracle of love in any marriage which God doesn't enter in. It is literally true that unless, except the Lord build the house, they labor in vain that build it. Except the Lord build the marriage or the home. Except the Lord build the business, the same thing exists between partners. Except the Lord, the relationship of God enters in, it cannot survive. So it is with spiritual teaching. Unless the Spirit of the Lord enter your spirit, your mind, your soul, and your very body and being, you are not married to the Christ. You have not known the mystical union of oneness with God. But when you meet your teaching or your teacher, you will find such a complete surrender of your mental convictions, your intellectual beliefs. These will all be surrendered, and you will melt into a union with the Christ. You are Christ's, and Christ is God, or Christ is God's, only in that moment of surrender to your spiritual conviction. That is not true of you as a human being any more than the promises of the Bible are true to you as a human being. God's promises are not to human beings. God's promises are to the children of God. And the children of God are those who have surrendered their humanhood to the divine, their personal interests to the universal interests. A child of God has surrendered all thought of personal demonstration and lives only in the consciousness of being one with everyone in the universe and, of course, one with God. To say that you love God whom you have not seen, but you do not love man whom you have seen, makes you a liar. And in the same way to say, I serve God, but I'm not too interested in man, he should make his own demonstration, is to be a liar. Service to God and service to man is one. since man is all of the God you will ever know. Because all of the God there is appears on earth as man. There is no God apart from man. And when you recognize God in your neighbor, when you recognize God in humanity, you have become a member of the household of God, a saint in the spiritual kingdom. But until then, you are still a separate entity out here. Now, when you have surrendered that and become one of the household of God, agreeing that your love for God is made manifest in your love of man, and that your ideal and your idea is not that of personal demonstration, but of finding your place in the spiritual kingdom, finding your union not merely with God, but with the children of God, then comes that moment of self-surrender into the infinite sea of spirit, in which relationship you find life by grace. The good of God flows to you through all of those who become part of your universe. Until that time, each one is withholding unto themselves, even from you. But when you make your surrender into the universal one, then God pours that good through to you, through all. To the children of God, to those who live in their communion with God and their fellow man, in service to God and their fellow man, to those the promises are literally kept. Son, all that I have is thine. And from then on, there's no need for personal consideration or personal thought. Now, it is in a spiritual teaching, in a spiritual unfoldment, that you are able to find this communion with God that makes you one with man, makes you one with all of the spiritual good, with all of the household of God. Just as in the book of John, you are able to find that the study of the book of John will show you how you can become one with a spiritual teaching, and through finding your oneness with that spiritual teaching, all of a sudden discover that you're one with God, you're one with your church members, you're one with your tradesmen, you're one with your social activities. Just thinking of this particular part here, then cometh he to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near to the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. Now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus on the well, and it was about the 6th hour. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus saith unto her, Give me to drink. For his disciples were gone away unto the city to buy meat. Then saith the woman of Samaria unto him, How is it that thou, being a Jew, askest drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. But you see right there, that woman had separated herself from the universal whole because of the custom of the day, which is our custom today, that Jews are something different from Gentiles, that Protestants are different from Catholics, that white is different from black, yellow is different from white. And because we still have that mental reservation, you'd be surprised how much of that you still have in you until you really and truly get down to iron it out and see where you stand on that point. You might also say the same thing, even if you'd say, oh, I'm willing to be one with all the rest of the world. I have no racial, religious, or color prejudices. You'd be like this woman of Samaria and believe the other fellow has a prejudice probably toward you. Now, this woman evidently had no prejudice toward the Hebrews, but she was still convinced that the Hebrews had the prejudice toward her, and probably did, but not the Master. He had entered into his oneness with God. he had found his spiritual teaching, as you well know, and so he had found his oneness with all people. So he answers, if thou knewest the gift of God, and who it is that saith to thee, give me to drink, thou wouldst have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. The woman saith unto him, Sir, thou hast nothing to draw with, the well is deep. From whence then hast thou that living water? Art thou greater than our father Jacob, which gave us the well, and drank thereof himself, and his children, and his cattle? Jesus answered and said unto her, Whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again, but whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. The woman saith unto him, Sir, give me this water, that I thirst not, neither come hither to draw. When we humanly live our human relationships, the only water or bread or wine that we have to give anyone is of a material nature, and after we have given it, the next day they will thirst or hunger again for more. After you enter into your spiritual teaching, after you have recognized that teaching that makes you one with God and one with man, from then on, that which you impart is not of yourself or of your purse, but of God. And in the giving of that, you are giving the spiritual water, the spiritual wine, and the spiritual bread, the word of life that means healing, salvation, saving, reformation. Only in proportion as you find your spiritual teaching, only in proportion as you find the Master, your recognition of your true identity, only in that proportion can you give to the world living water. Only then can God fulfill itself through you to the world, so that your part may be to bring peace into individual consciousness and collective acceptance, universal acceptance. That is why when you read the book of John, if you come into agreement with it, you will have found your spiritual teaching. And in this particular case, the teaching will be this: Thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me, for I and the Father are one. And all that the Father hath is mine. And I am in you, and you are in me, and we are all in Christ Jesus. And in Christ Jesus we are God's, of God, belong to God. And all that I have is thine. That's what you will find of the Master teaching in the book of John. As you come into that agreement, then, you no longer have your own of yourself. You have that which is God and of God, and it is that that pours through you to the world and makes you one with the world in giving and in receiving. When you find your spiritual teaching, you will find that that teaching has taken from you the belief of personal possession, the belief of personal acquisition, the belief of personal powers. You will have the understanding of the great truth: the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. And then hear that same voice come back to you and say, Ah, yes, son, but all that I have is thine. And you'll know then why the infinite good of God is never divided. God's goodness is not divided up among the 4 billion people on earth. Remember this: God's goodness in its infinite fullness is given unto every one of the 4 billion. There is no such thing as dividing a spiritual quality. But now let's take one of those spiritual qualities and see: honesty. Could honesty be divided up even among a dozen of us here? Or, if it is honesty, wouldn't each one have to possess the fullness and the completeness of honesty? 99% honesty is dishonesty. Honesty has to be 100%. And so each one must have 100%. 99% of love is hate. You either have love or you haven't it, but you can't divide it. You can give love or not, but you can't divide it. If you had one child or 10, you couldn't divide your love among the 10 children. You'd have to give all of your love to each one of the children. Isn't that true? Couldn't be otherwise. If you had a dozen brothers or a dozen sisters, you couldn't divide your love between them. You'd have to give the fullness of your love, the fullness of your integrity to each one. And so it is with the infinity of God's wealth. God cannot divide the spiritual riches among us. God bestows the gift of infinite riches upon all of us, and that goes right down even unto dollar bills. Even dollar bills are not divided. Everyone may have every dollar bill in the world, and everybody else have every dollar bill in the world, since even dollar bills are spiritual. They are spiritual. That which you handle in your pocketbook is merely the symbols of the real dollar bills. There's a secret of supply right in that statement. If there were such a thing as $1 million in bills out here on a table, may I remind you that they're dead and that they have no power to come to me or to go to you. They would remain out here on that table forever of their own accord. What would start the distribution of that $1 million? Something within the consciousness of the individual. And some would have more and some would have less, depending on their consciousness of supply. Because the money of itself cannot flow to you or to me. Now, the secret of supply is in that truth. If dollar bills are withholding themselves from you, don't blame the dollar bills because they have no power to come to you. Don't blame the world because there isn't anything or any power or anyone in the world withholding them from you. The flow of them to you must take place as an activity of your own consciousness. And it has to begin with the realization of the fact that the dollars do not belong to you but to God, and that they are bestowed by God on His beloved. Therefore, all that the Father hath is yours, and you begin with what you already have and start sharing it, not waiting for it to come in, but to start letting what you already have go out. It could be a dime. The widow's mite must have been very small, but it consisted of all that she had. So we begin with whatever we have, even the mite, and begin to understand that since the fullness of the Godhead bodily is mine, I can start with what I have to pour it out. Never be concerned with getting. There is no such thing as getting supply. There is only such thing of letting supply flow out from you, since you already possess it in its infinity. Now, the best way to keep money from you is to desire it, to want it, and to try to demonstrate it. There's no better way of setting up a barrier between it and you. And the same way with love, with people, with friendships. There's no finer way of separating yourself from love, from friends, from service, than desiring it. Because the desire is based on the belief that it is separate and apart from you. One great poet, philosopher, has said on that very subject that the only way to have a friend is to be a friend. And so, as with dollars, there's only one way to acquire the activity of love in your experience or friendship or companionship, and that is to start with whatever degree you have at the moment and begin to share it. Then you'll find there is no lack of dollars, companions, loves, friendships, not a bit. Desire, it is written in, I believe, Science and Health, Miss Zeddy's book, desire is prayer. But she should have explained what she really meant because she knew. The desire for God is prayer. The desire to know God, to experience the Christ, is prayer. But the desire for friendship, for companionship, for money, for a home is sin. Direct sin. It's a violation of the law of God. The law of God, you're to take no thought for desiring these things. You're to take thought only for one thing, seeking the kingdom of God. Nothing else. Desire for anything, person, or place is sin. Desire for a knowledge of God, for an experience of God, for the revelation of the Christ is prayer. And when we once have God, the kingdom of God, the knowledge of God, the realization of God, all things are added unto us. That is, we find then that in our communion with God, our oneness with God, we are one with everything that God has. It is literally true that in having God, we have the fulfillment of, you have me, now all that I have is yours. Again, you see, it's like the marriage. The reason marriage comes into this so much is that in spiritual work, you'll notice this in the Song of Solomon and in many other spiritual writings, that the entire basis of spiritual teaching is based on marriage. It's all based on communion or oneness with the Christ, with God. And so the emotions that are felt in that communion with God are exactly the same as are felt in our human loves. The only reason that we do not see it in fulfillment in our experience is that we take human love before we have the love of God, and we make something separate or apart, and usually something selfish of it. If we first knew the love of God, the surrender in that mystical union, God, all that I have is thine, just as all that you have is mine. My time is yours. My body is the temple of the living God. So my time and my hands and my love are at your service, and I am in you and you in me. Then if we first had that experience, when the time for human marriage took place, we would find that that same relationship, that same blending of oneness would take place, and the marriage ceremony would really be true, to become one. If we haven't experienced it in our human marriage, there is still time to experience it in our spiritual teaching, so that our spiritual teaching may lead us to this communion with God, so that in receiving of God, what we bestow will be living waters, not temporal good. Now, in the meanwhile, his disciples prayed him, saying, Master, eat. But he said unto them, I have meat to eat, which ye know not of. In this final passage, when you find your spiritual teaching, when you find your spiritual master, that which you become completely one with, you will also be able to say after that, I have no need of anything, person, place, or thing in the outer world. I have the inner meat, the inner wine, the inner water to bestow. I have no more desires, no more needs. I have only fulfillment. The moment we come to that place of inflow from God, while we no longer need that which is without, strangely enough, everything and everyone without becomes part of our being. That's the strange part of the spiritual teaching, that what you surrender, you have. That which you hold on to, you lose. And so as you release person, place, and thing into their oneness with God, that's why you've heard me say, do not proselyte. Certainly I tell our Infinite Way students, do not proselyte, do not try to sell the Infinite Way to anyone. If the opportunity comes to present it, to offer it to them, well and good, but be very careful, not too soon and not too insistent. Let them alone with their own demonstration in God. They'll find their way, whether it's the Infinite Way one way or the Infinite Way a different way. Ultimately, they'll reach that place. You can't hurry them, no matter how much you wish. That is why the Master also tells us in this teaching that I have not come to bring peace but a sword. I've come to divide households, separate fathers from sons and mothers from daughters. Just in that sense of saying that the Christ of me sets you free in Christ to follow your own way. Usually when we do that, we find again that we have drawn them closer to us. Everything that we release, we draw it to us. This is a spiritual teaching. This is the teaching of the Christ. Everything that you loose, you have. Everything that you free, you find bound to you. So we free ourselves of desire, except that desire for this holy union, this communion with God, this conscious oneness with God. And when we have that, we have it all. And so, again, remember, you individually, in order to be happy, healthy, whole, must find your spiritual teaching. It need not be this one. It need not be my approach. It must be yours. It must be the one to which you can surrender yourself wholeheartedly. It must be the one that would enable you to walk into a metaphysical library or bookshop and say, I'm not interested in anything in here but the one message, the one book. I have found my own. My own has come to me. When you have found that, you will have found a guide to life, the rule, the laws of God. It is legitimate and right that we search for truth. It is legitimate and right that we investigate every approach that is presented to us that has the smell about it of sanctity, of integrity. We waste a lot of time with a lot of teachings that never had that integrity behind them. But we have the right to pray for judgment so that we may be rightly led, and then investigate. But when you have found your own, forsake all others for it. When you have found your God, forsake all the gods of the world for that one God. When you have found your way, even though you be the only person in the world following it, follow it. It will never leave you. It will never forsake you. Everyone who has ever founded some church movement or religious movement like Calvin, Luther, all of these people who've drawn away from where they were at one time or another the only one with that particular conviction. That's one reason I have such great love and great respect for Mrs. Eddy. She was one person in the world who had her conviction, and she was willing to take the torture and the torment and the persecution and everything else in the world to stand up for her conviction in the world. And I guess at one time she was the only person in the whole world who believed in what she believed in. But you see, her God never forsook her. She went through trials and she went through tribulations, not because of her God, but because, as the Master has said here, for which of these things do you stone me? These wonderful things I've done for you. Now, for which of these things do you stone me? And so for the millions of us I'm one of them, who had healing through her discovery, through her work, through her ministration. For those wonderful, wonderful healings, she took a great deal of stoning. There will be a lot of people pay heavy prices for what they did in their persecution of the Christ through her. But that's their business, not ours. In her discovery of her God and her teaching, she found that which never left her and never forsook her. You cannot put your faith in princes. You've got to remain true to your God. First edition of Science. She stayed with it, and she stayed with her God, and it never left her. So with us. We are just reproductions of the Luthers and the Calvins and the others, Fox, the Quakers. We are just reproductions of them. We have found a God, our God. We have found our teachings, and our integrity, our loyalty and fidelity to that one, even against the world, ensures the fact that our God, our teacher, our teaching never leaves us nor forsakes us. The import of all this is just this. Find your teacher or find your teaching. Hug it to yourself. Become convinced of it. Marry it. Surrender yourself. Surrender your money. Surrender your body, your time, your effort unto it. And watch what it means when it says, Son, thou art ever with me, and all that I have is thine. You'll find that your God, your Christ, your conviction will never leave you nor forsake you. In my studies, I have found that the book of John in the Bible is the one that most completely reveals the teaching of the Master, Christ Jesus, in its highest sense. There is less of the human in it and more of the divine, and it is a higher teaching, and it is what we call the mystical teaching. Do not be afraid of the word mystical. The reason that the world fears it is that there are two main dictionaries in our American world, Webster and Funk and Wagnalls. And on the subject of mysticism, they are divided in their meanings, and as a matter of fact, each one has a meaning contrary to the other. And so many people have read, I believe it's the Funk and Wagnalls definition, which is completely incorrect. I don't know how it stays in there all these years, but it hasn't any basis of accuracy at all from any standpoint. It is a meaning in there just based on ignorance and superstition, rather than on research into its actual meaning. The real meaning of mystical or mystic is conscious oneness with God. A mystic, or rather a mystical teaching, is a teaching that says that you can commune with God individually and receive impartations from God. That you can pray directly to God and receive answers from God. That you can receive, well, what the world would call messages or intuitions or impulses from God. That is the true meaning of mysticism. And of course, all Christianity in that sense is mystical, because it teaches the individual prayer and communion with God, and all spiritual metaphysical teachings are mystical. Every one of them, in that they all teach that since you and the Father are one, that oneness can become a conscious reality in your experience, and that you can receive direction, guidance, wisdom from God. John gives us that mystical approach. John is a complete revelation of the truth that I and the Father are one. Thou seest me, thou seest the Father, since we're right here in one, not two. All that the Father hath is mine. The Father imparts to me that which I shall do. If I speak of myself, he says, I speak a lie. I bear witness to a lie. My doctrine is not mine, but his that sent me. You see that oneness? All one, but that one the Father. And he, Jesus, the vehicle, the outer expression. God, the invisible within, Jesus, the visible without. So, as we come to that realization that there is an infinite invisible, which we call God, of which this is the outer form and expression, that even this body is the temple of the living God, that's what makes it ageless, changeless, diseaseless, and deathless. You can no more be separated from your body by death than you can be separated from your own integrity, your own being. I had a living example of that. One morning in Boston, I was riding down to my office in a streetcar, passing a little stretch of woods, and not thinking of anything in particular, when all of a sudden it seemed that the air opened up, it separated from itself, then came together again. And then the voice said, just that ridiculous is the idea of death. We can no more be separated from life, or life can no more be separated from itself than the air can be separated from itself. I didn't understand the meaning of it at that time. When I got to the office, there was a telephone call soon after to come over a block or two from my office, and I did, and the lady said, there's a man inside dying. He's under materia medica. The doctor just left here and said that he would pass within a few hours and to notify the indicator. And so I thought that whether it shocked him or not, I would let him know so that if he wished, he might have the benefit of spiritual help. And I told him, but he told me that he knew that he was dying and that it was only a matter of a short time. But that if spiritual help or any other could help him, he did really want to live. And so, if you would care to go to that man, he's waiting for you. On the other hand, if you feel that you don't want to take a case at that stage of its so-called appearance, you're under no obligation to take it. And I said, well, I will take it for two reasons. First, the responsibility isn't mine. I'm not responsible for anybody's living or dying. It's out of my hand. The issues of life are with God. Secondly, I think the treatment was given this morning while I was riding in the streetcar, and we will see. So I went into this man, and I said, I'm not going to talk to you. Certainly not going to try to teach you. I'm going to sit here in the silence for a few minutes and leave you, and I'll come back this afternoon on my way home. I did that, and in that silence, of course, all I could do was remember how ridiculous it is for life to separate from itself. When I went back that afternoon, the man was sitting up in bed having some broth. When I went back the next morning, he was up and dressed, having breakfast. 5 days later, he went away on vacation. Well, you see, there wasn't any such thing as being healed or anyone doing any healing work. Truth had revealed itself. Life cannot be separated from itself. And if the body is the temple of life, how can you take life out of its temple? As a matter of fact, that would mean space, wouldn't it? Over here is life and over there is a temple. Oh, no. Temple is life itself formed. So our body is spirit itself formed. There is not a spirit in a body, as Orthodox religion would have us believe. There is not a spirit in a body any more than there is intelligence in a brain. The brain certainly is the avenue of intelligence, and the body is the avenue of life. But life isn't in the body. Life is the substance of which the body is formed. And as you realize that, you will find that your body is as indestructible as your life. And it is as ageless as your life. In the knowledge of this, it becomes a sin to grow old. to age, to run down, and to die. Because it is only the acceptance of a belief that the body is made of some substance other than God, Spirit. It is the belief that while life is endless, some forms of life must come to an end. And of course, the question comes back, but what of these people who have aged and died? And in that I'll have to shock you. It's never happened. Nowhere, at no time in the history of the world has a death ever occurred. Not even a passing on, if you want metaphysical language. It has never happened anywhere at any time. In the beginning, God. And God manifested himself as man and woman, that is, as individual being. And I'm sure that God has maintained the continuity of its own existence in its infinite individual forms forever and forever and forever. And anyone who ever existed at the beginning exists now. And anyone who has ever existed now will exist forever. And any pictures that take place in the human mind of aging and dying have no more reality to them than the pictures that take place in your dreams and sleep. If a person decides at any time that they are dying and succumbs to that belief, the first thing they will learn is that they stood there watching it. And as soon as it was over, they must have had a wonderful laugh to see that dream figure disappear off the bed or wherever it happened to be, and find themselves standing there still intact as they always had been in their infinite glory and perfection. No, I'm speaking to you out of the depth now of realized wisdom. I'm not saying anything to you from theory or anything that I have read in a book. I'm giving you now that which has taken place in my experience in actual demonstration. I have witnessed it, I have seen it. And I can tell you that the vision of those who believe that they have died is so instantaneous. It's like waking out of a horrible nightmare to find yourself safe at home in your own bed with your loved one. Only more so because some of that dream of human existence has fallen away, and we behold ourselves more nearly as we are. That should not be an encouragement to anyone to die or to want to pass on. Rather, it should be a lesson in the fruitlessness, the uselessness of the experience. But let us not merely wish to live humanly. Let us not wish to translate this into a desire to live more years of human existence. But rather, let us translate this into the understanding of the spiritual nature of being and of body, so that you do not merely linger here a few more years on earth, but that you make the transition here and now on earth. Make the transition here and now while we can all be together and share it, so that you can say like the Master, I can give you living waters out of the depth of my God-given revelation and unfoldment. I can give you waters, and if you'll drink the waters I will give you, you will experience everlasting life. In this that I'm saying to you this morning, I am giving you everlasting life, immortal life. I'm giving you of that hidden water, that spiritual water, in the revelation that life, God, in the beginning, manifested and expressed itself as our individual being. We have existed throughout eternity. We will continue existing throughout eternity. And in proportion to your acceptance of this, the barrier, that is your original birth date, will start to disappear. And in disappearing, you will catch glimpses of the immortality of your life in what is called both the past and the future, since there is no past or future. You see, a minute ago has no existence. A minute from now will have no existence. The only moment I can know is this moment. And it is this moment in which I'm knowing everything, whether you give it the title past, present, or future. To me, it's now. And it's now that I'm living. And it's now that I have always lived. And it's now I always will live. I cannot live the minute that I came into this room, and I cannot live even 1 minute from now. So there's no use of looking forward to being 100 or 200. I can't ever reach it. The only thing I can reach is now. And this nowness is God, pronouncing itself my individual being and yours. My moment of now is God, the one mind, uttering itself. My now is life expressing itself. I do not express life. Life is expressing itself as my individual being. I do not express intelligence. Intelligence is expressing itself through me or as me, as my individual being. I cannot even express or reflect religion. Religion itself, truth itself, has to voice itself and utter itself. Don't you remember also the Master saying that if I kept quiet, these very stones would shriek it out? Why? Because truth must utter itself. And I'll tell you this, if I won't permit it to use my lips, some other individual will come along and it will use their lips. And if we decide to destroy each other with atomic bombs, you'll be surprised that there'll be sermons in stones and in running brooks. Truth will utter itself if it has to put a voice in rocks, in mountains, in valleys, and in oceans. Truth will utter itself if there isn't a human being around to hear it, because there will always be the sons and daughters of God. You never will destroy the sons and daughters of God. I got a great thrill one day traveling to the Middle West and finding myself at luncheon in the diner with a man, and one of the first questions he asked, he didn't know me and I didn't know him, but table companions, we spoke. One of the first things he said was, well, what do you think about these world conditions? Think the world's going to destroy itself? I said, I wouldn't be a bit surprised. He said, you don't seem concerned. I said, no, I don't care any more about that than I do about tearing up yesterday's newspaper. Oh, he said, you do my heart good. And he said, I've come to the conclusion that you can't destroy anything good or real. It can't even destroy itself. So whatever is destroyed or what destroys itself is only that which would have to destroy itself in the end anyhow, just unrealities. But you sound almost like a metaphysician. He says, I hate the word. But he says, I do know this, that the good perpetuates itself. Life can't destroy itself or be destroyed. There you have it. Life cannot destroy itself or be destroyed. Life is God. But there is no God but you and me. God manifests itself as individual being. In the beginning, God. Life. Life expressed itself as you. And the responsibility is on its shoulder.
The deep things of God must be spiritually discerned. And, as you have heard, the Master reveals that thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me, for I and the Father are one. And you will remember that all spiritual revelation reveals this oneness. And the infinite way makes much of that oneness. As a matter of fact, it bases its entire principle on oneness. And so, for further light, let me read you from Matthew 25, beginning verse 31. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory, and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory. And before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divideth his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. Then shall the King say unto them on his right hand, Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was an hungered, and ye gave me meat. I was thirsty, and ye gave me drink. I was a stranger, and ye took me in, naked, and ye clothed me. I was sick, and ye visited me. I was in prison, and ye came unto me. Then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when saw we thee an hunger, and fed thee? Or thirsty, and gave thee drink? When saw we thee a stranger, and took thee in, or naked, and clothed thee? Or when saw we thee sick, or in prison, and came unto thee? The King shall answer, and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me.